My name is Kayla Stone. I am 29 years old. Exactly 4 hours ago, my phone vibrated with a call from my banker asking a single question that made the blood freeze in my veins. Ms. Stone, did you just authorize an $85,000 wire transfer to a Brittany Stone? When I said no, he immediately froze the account. But right now, I am standing in my parents' backyard at a neighborhood barbecue, watching my father clink his iced tea glass and boast to a crowd that he just gave my younger sister an $85,000 wedding gift. They stole my life savings. They have no idea they just committed federal wire fraud. Before I tell you exactly how this house of cards collapsed, let me know your age in the comments and if you have ever had to deal with a toxic family member. Welcome to Zara Told Stories. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe in karma, because this one is a masterclass in it. The July heat in rural Iowa is a physical weight. It presses down on your shoulders and fills your lungs with thick, suffocating humidity. I stood near the brick smoker, the heavy scent of hickory wood and slow roasting pork clinging to my clothes. Beyond the pristine wooden fences of our neighborhood, the endless rolling plains of rich topsoil stretched out toward the horizon, interrupted only by the slow, sweeping blades of distant wind turbines. It was the picture-perfect setting for a wholesome Midwestern weekend, where everyone knew your name and families stuck together through thick and thin. But nothing about my family was wholesome. I took a slow sip of my tart lemonade. The ice rattled against the glass, providing a quiet, steady rhythm that grounded me as I watched the theater unfold across the lawn. A few yards away, my parents, Gary and Susan, held court under the cedar gazebo. They stood with the Peterson family from down the street, their faces flushed with the intoxicating thrill of their own perceived generosity. "Well, you only get married once," my father Gary declared, his chest puffed out beneath a crisp blue polo shirt. Susan and I figured, why make the kids struggle to pay for a venue? We just handed Brittany an $85,000 wedding gift, in cash. My mother Susan beamed, adjusting her wide-brimmed straw hat to shield her eyes from the afternoon sun. "We want Brittany and Trent to start their lives on a solid foundation. Family takes care of family, after all." I watched a bead of condensation chart a slow path down my glass, soaking into my fingertips. A precision agriculture data analyst by trade, I spent my days evaluating crop yields, predicting soil rot, and mapping root systems. I was trained to look beneath the surface to find the decay hiding under healthy-looking dirt. Standing there, on the freshly cut grass, I applied that exact same ruthless methodology to the people who raised me. They were standing on a rotting foundation, basking in the glow of a theft they believed they had flawlessly executed. "Speaking of saving a buck," Gary chuckled, leaning in conspiratorially to nudge Dale Peterson on the shoulder. "You would not believe how easy it was to bypass the security on the Johnsons' Wi-Fi next door. I tinkered with their router settings for 10 minutes yesterday and got us free high-speed internet for the month. People leave their digital doors wide open if you know which knobs to turn." My jaw tightened so hard my teeth ached. Dale let out an uncomfortable laugh, shifting his weight. But Gary just smiled, taking a long sip of his sweet tea. That was my father. He viewed boundaries, whether they were digital, physical, or personal, as mere suggestions. He believed his title of father granted him universal clearance to harvest whatever resources he desired from the people around him. He thought he was a genius for guessing a neighbor's password. He thought he was an absolute mastermind for emptying his oldest daughter's bank account. Across the yard, my younger sister Brittany made her grand entrance. She was 26 and radiated a loud, unearned confidence. She paraded across the manicured lawn wearing a white linen sundress that likely cost more than my first car. She stopped at every group of neighbors, flashing her diamond engagement ring and soaking in the community admiration like a sponge. She lived in a manufactured reality funded by a wire transfer that was currently suspended in a digital void. "Look at her," My mother sighed, placing a hand over her heart, as Brittany laughed loudly at something a neighbor said. She deserves the best. She is marrying into the Collins family. We could not let her walk into that marriage empty-handed. I felt a sharp spike of adrenaline claw at the back of my throat. The urge to step forward to shatter their smug grins and demand answers right there on the grass was almost overwhelming. It was the visceral, defensive instinct of a daughter who had been treated like a human ATM for her entire adult life. I could walk up to that gazebo, flip the patio table, and scream until my lungs gave out. I could tell the Petersons that the generous wedding gift was actually the down payment for my future home. It was the money I saved by working 60-hour weeks, eating cheap meals, and driving a used sedan while Brittany bounced between failed internships and maxed out credit cards. But I swallowed the anger down, pushing it deep into the pit of my stomach. Screaming would only feed their narrative. It would paint me as the hysterical, jealous older sister, an ugly role they had tried to cast me in for 2 decades. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to confront them so they could use the audience of neighbors to gaslight me into backing down and playing the obedient daughter. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, recalling the exact tone of my banker's voice from earlier that morning. Evan Thorne was a meticulous man. He had handled my accounts for 5 years. When he called me at work, he did not sound panicked. He sounded like a predator who had just caught a rat in a trap. The digital footprint did not match your usual network, Evan had said, the rhythmic clicking of his keyboard echoing over the line. The transfer was initiated from a residential address in your hometown, but the security questions were answered incorrectly on the first attempt. I flagged it for fraud. The money has not moved, Miss Stone. It is safe. I opened my eyes and looked directly at my father. He caught my gaze from across the yard and offered a wide, arrogant smile, raising his glass of iced tea in a mock toast. He thought he had won. He thought I was standing there in silence because I had checked my banking app and realized I was completely powerless. He thought I was defeated. I did not scowl. I did not glare. I simply raised my glass of lemonade and returned the toast, taking another long, slow sip. Let them drink their tea. Let them boast to the neighbors about their incredible generosity. Let Brittany spin in her expensive white dress and plan a wedding she could never afford. I did not need to raise my voice. The bank had locked the vault and every single dollar still belonged to me. The timer on this bomb was already counting down, and I only needed to stand back and wait for the blast. The late afternoon sun shifted lower over the horizon, casting long, stretching shadows across the freshly manicured lawn. The stifling humidity refused to break, clinging to my skin as the crowd naturally began to migrate toward the expansive stone patio. The rhythmic hum of summer cicadas provided a steady background chorus to the clinking of glasses and the low murmur of neighborhood gossip. I stayed near the edge of the gathering, feeling the cool condensation of my lemonade glass slipping down my fingers. Brittany stood at the head of the wrought iron patio table, holding a thick, cream-colored envelope against her chest. She tapped a silver spoon against the rim of her iced tea glass. The sharp ringing sound sliced through the ambient chatter, drawing every eye toward her. She practically vibrated with self-importance, her white linen sundress catching the gentle breeze that rolled in off the distant fields. "Guess what I just did, Brittany," announced, her voice pitched loud enough for the neighbors 3 houses down to hear. She dramatically dropped the envelope onto the glass tabletop with a satisfying thud. The thick, heavy cardstock slid an inch before coming to a rest. Shimmering gold-embossed lettering caught the sunlight, spelling out the Grand Prairie Estate. A collective murmur of awe rippled through the gathered guests. The Grand Prairie Estate was the most exclusive wedding venue in a 300-mile radius. It featured imported Italian marble fountains, centuries-old oak trees, and a waiting list that usually spanned 2 years. "I got a cancellation slot for mid-October," Brittany squealed, clapping her hands together. "I signed the contract an hour ago. It is officially locked in." Trent, her fiancé, wrapped an arm around her waist, smiling proudly at the impressed faces of his future in-laws and their neighbors. He wore a pastel button-down shirt and boat shoes, looking every bit the part of a country club heir apparent. "A $40,000 deposit," Susan gushed, stepping forward to place a hand on Brittany's shoulder. "And we took care of every single penny." Brittany nodded eagerly, pulling the crisp legal document from the envelope and smoothing it out on the table for everyone to admire. "The venue director told me over the phone that the October date would be gone by tomorrow morning, so I did not even wait to go into the bank. I just logged into the portal, typed in the routing numbers from the account Dad set up for me, and authorized the electronic check right there in the bridal suite. The funds are pending, and the date is mine." I took a slow breath, holding the cool glass against my palm. The dramatic irony hung in the humid air, invisible to everyone but me. Brittany had just authorized a non-refundable payment of $40,000 using the routing numbers of an account that Evan Thorne had frozen tight just hours earlier. She was building her dream wedding on a foundation of phantom money. The digital request was currently traveling through cyberspace, heading straight toward an impenetrable firewall. Brittany caught me watching her from the edge of the patio. Her triumphant smile shifted into a familiar, condescending sneer. She picked up the contract and waved it in my direction. "I know this kind of luxury is a little hard for you to grasp, Kayla," she called out, ensuring the surrounding guests tuned in to the dynamic. "You spend all day playing in the dirt, looking at soil samples and wind energy reports. You probably think imported silk table linens and crystal chandeliers are a waste of resources." A few of the neighbors chuckled, shifting uncomfortably. This was the established rhythm of our childhood. I was the practical, invisible workhorse, and Brittany was the delicate, ornamental prize. Growing up, I worked early morning shifts at the local diner to pay for my own calculus tutors, while my parents drained their discretionary funds to buy Brittany custom pageant dresses and elite dance choreography. They valued her aesthetics over my intellect. They believed her ability to charm a room was a far superior investment than my ability to analyze raw data. I stepped forward, the soles of my shoes silent against the stone pavers. I did not glare at her. I did not defend my career. Instead, I approached the table and looked down at the thick vellum paper resting next to the potato salad. "It is a beautiful venue, Brittany," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. I glanced at the fine print running along the bottom edge of the page. My eyes, trained to spot anomalies in thousands of lines of code, immediately found the penalty clauses. Paragraph 4, Section 2 detailed the financial consequences of a bounced electronic check. A returned payment triggered an immediate breach of contract, a steep percentage-based penalty fee, and permanent blacklisting from their entire network of affiliate caterers and florists. I looked at the signature line. Her cursive loops were pressed hard into the paper in fresh blue ink. She had legally bound herself to a severe financial penalty, relying entirely on stolen capital that she would never receive. She had handed them a loaded weapon and pointed it directly at her own credit score. "You should be taking notes," Kayla Susan chimed in, stepping up beside her golden child. "This is how you secure your social standing. You cannot just hide behind computer screens your whole life. You need to understand how the real world operates, how wealth opens doors." I nodded slowly, committing the sheer delusion of her statement to memory. The real world operated on verifiable facts. Wealth opened doors only when the ledger balanced. They were standing on a trap door bragging about the view. I shifted my gaze to the far side of the patio where Gary stood near the smoking grill. He held a pair of stainless steel tongs, gesturing grandly toward Trent's father, Victor Collins. Victor was a man of quiet, substantial wealth. He wore a simple pressed linen shirt and held a glass of sparkling water. He did not need to raise his voice or puff out his chest. Real power rarely announced itself. Gary, on the other hand, was practically shouting, trying to establish dominance in a conversation he was woefully unequipped for. "You know how it is, Victor. Gary boomed, taking a long drag from his cigar. You have to keep your assets liquid. Real estate is fine, but when your daughter needs a premier wedding venue on a moment's notice, you need cash ready to deploy. I always make sure my portfolio has the flexibility to handle these six-figure family expenses. Victor offered a polite, tight-lipped smile, taking a small sip of his water. That is very prudent of you, Gary, Victor replied, his voice calm and measured. Financial agility is certainly a rare trait these days. Gary patted his own chest, looking incredibly pleased with himself. It is all about smart wealth management, setting up the right accounts, moving capital when the market demands it. I listened to my father spin a narrative of generational wealth and financial genius, knowing full well his entire strategy consisted of booting up my old college laptop and stealing his eldest daughter's passwords. He was attempting to stand toe-to-toe with a man who understood the intricacies of high-level finance using stolen courage and a forged digital signature. The heat of the afternoon sun beat down on my shoulders, but inside my mind was a cool, sterile laboratory. I analyzed my family not as parents and a sister, but as corrupted data files. For 29 years, they had conditioned me to absorb their insults, to clean up their messes, and to accept my role as the endless supplier of their safety net. They expected me to eventually discover the missing $85,000 and cry. They expected me to beg for it back. And when I did, they planned to use this exact crowd of neighbors and future in-laws to shame me into silence. They would have called me selfish for demanding my own money back right before Brittany's wedding. They thought they had engineered a flawless emotional extortion plot. But I was not going to play my assigned role. I was not going to give them the hysterical confrontation they needed to paint me as the villain. I looked at Brittany's smug face, at Susan's proud posture, and at Gary's puffed-out chest. They were celebrating a victory that did not exist. "If you will excuse me," I said, my voice smooth and devoid of any lingering affection. "I need to go grab some more ice for the coolers." I turned my back on the wrought iron table and walked away from the gazebo. I did not look over my shoulder. I left them standing in the sun, bragging to the neighborhood about a fortune they would never touch and a wedding venue they would never walk into. The weekend was just beginning, and the bank's automated processing systems would remain dormant until Monday morning. I had 48 hours of uninterrupted silence before their entire reality shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. The automated glass doors of my Des Moines corporate office slid shut behind me, sealing away the sticky July heat. Inside, the air conditioning hummed a steady, crisp rhythm, offering a sterile sanctuary from the chaotic humidity of my weekend. My workspace sat on the 14th floor of a sleek glass building overlooking the sprawling cityscape that eventually bled into the endless Iowa farmland. I dropped my leather tote onto my desk and booted up my workstation. 3 curved monitors flickered to life, bathing my face in the cool blue light of satellite topography. My job as a precision agriculture data analyst required a surgical level of detail. Today, I was mapping deep soil health across a 1,000-acre commercial corn farm situated just outside Cedar Rapids. The client wanted to know why their yield was failing despite pouring tens of thousands of dollars into premium fertilizer. I pulled up the infrared spectrum imagery highlighting the superficial layers of dirt in bright green. From a distance, the topsoil looked vibrant and healthy. But my algorithms were not designed to admire the surface. I recalibrated the lens, peering deeper into the subterranean root structures. Dark red blotches flooded the screen, revealing widespread nitrogen depletion and hidden root rot. The farmer was throwing expensive nutrients at a foundation that was already dead. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the creeping red decay on monitor 2. The metaphor was too stark to ignore. My parents, Gary and Susan, spent their entire lives cultivating their topsoil. They bought the right polo shirts, attended the right neighborhood barbecues, and threw cash at country club memberships they could barely afford. They presented a vibrant, flawless facade to the world. But beneath the surface, they were financially and morally bankrupt. The root rot was systemic. They had spent decades bleeding my resources dry to fund their superficial illusions, and they expected me to just keep dumping fertilizer on dead earth. Looking at the jagged red lines on the topographical map, a sharp memory pierced through my concentration. I blinked, and suddenly I was 18 years old again. It was a blistering August morning, and my feet throbbed inside cheap, slip-resistant sneakers. I had just finished a brutal 9-hour graveyard shift, wiping down greasy tables and scrubbing fryers at a local diner. My uniform smelled like stale cooking oil, bleach, and exhaustion. I gripped a crumpled envelope containing my bi-weekly paycheck. It held just enough cash to cover 2 used community college biology textbooks and maybe a week of groceries if I strictly ate instant ramen. I had walked the final 2 miles home because the early Sunday bus schedule did not align with the end of my shift. When I finally turned the corner onto our suburban street, my legs felt like lead. But the sight waiting in our driveway forced me to stop dead in my tracks. A pristine cherry-red sedan sat gleaming in the morning sun. It still had an oversized white dealership bow fixed to the roof. Standing next to the driver's door was Brittany. She was 15 years old. She did not even have her learner's permit yet. She wore designer denim shorts and held a shiny new keyring dangling it in the light. Gary and Susan stood on the porch clapping and taking photos with a digital camera. "You deserve a reliable ride for your sophomore year," Susan had cooed, wrapping an arm around Brittany's shoulders. "We wanted you to have the best, so you can focus on your social life and extracurriculars." I stood on the sidewalk clutching my greasy diner envelope. I watched my parents finance a luxury vehicle for a high school sophomore, while their eldest daughter worked overnight labor just to afford educational materials. They did not notice me standing there, or if they did, they chose to look right through me. That was the exact moment the final shred of childhood naivete burned away. I realized that in the Stone household, I was not a daughter. I was a utility. Brittany was the investment, and I was the safety net meant to catch her when she inevitably crashed. I walked past that cherry-red sedan without saying a single word, went straight to my bedroom, and opened my first independent savings account online. I spent the next 11 years working with a relentless, terrifying focus to build an empire they could never touch. A sharp chime from my computer speakers snapped me back to the present. The red decay on the screen faded into the background as a notification bubble popped up on my encrypted email client. It was marked "Highly Urgent" from Evan Thorne at the downtown branch. I moved my mouse, clicking the secure link and typing in my dual-factor authentication code. The banking portal loaded with crisp efficiency. "Ms. Stone," the message read, "I am writing to formally confirm that the fraudulent electronic wire request of $85,000 has been permanently voided by our fraud prevention department. The origin account joint status has been irrevocably terminated. Furthermore, all of your assets have been successfully migrated into your new, solo, high-yield account. The perimeter is secure. Please contact me if you require further legal documentation." I read the words twice, feeling a profound physical weight lift from my chest. The money was safe. The fortress was locked. And more importantly, the weekend grace period was officially over. I glanced at the digital clock in the corner of my screen. It read 9:14 in the morning. Monday had arrived. Across the country, the automated clearinghouses that processed high-volume financial transactions were waking up. The invisible gears of the banking industry were beginning to turn, running their routine checks, balances, and verifications. Somewhere in the plush administrative offices of the Grand Prairie estate, A polite accounting manager was currently booting up their system. They were pulling up the $40,000 electronic check Brittany had so proudly authorized on Saturday afternoon. They were formatting the request, sending it through the secure processing network, and waiting for the corresponding bank to verify the funds. I picked up my ceramic coffee mug, blowing softly on the dark roast. I took a measured sip, letting the bitter warmth ground me. My parents were likely sitting at their kitchen table right now, drinking their own morning coffee, reviewing their neighborhood social victory. They probably thought they had outsmarted the system. They believed they had successfully extracted the necessary capital to secure their golden child's perfect societal launch into the Collins family. They did not realize the digital bridge they tried to cross had just been blown to pieces behind them. They were suspended in midair, hovering over a staggering financial canyon. I set my mug down next to my keyboard and turned my attention back to the soil mapping data on my monitor. The roots were rotten. The collapse was inevitable. I just needed to let gravity do its job. 10:14 in the morning. The precise hum of the office air conditioning broke the moment my smartphone vibrated against the polished glass of my desk. The sound was sharp and sudden. I glanced at the screen. My mother, Susan, was calling. I let it ring. 5 seconds later, the device buzzed again, then a third time. By the time the clock shifted to 10:16, I had 15 missed calls logged in bright red font. The screen lit up one more time, displaying a text message preview. "Call me now. Emergency." The capital letters practically radiated desperation. I reached out, but instead of unlocking the device, I simply pressed the side button, silencing the notifications. I flipped the phone face down. The black case blended into the dark surface of my workstation. I dragged my attention back to the third monitor. My current project involved analyzing efficiency metrics for a sprawling wind farm in the northern sector of the state. The datasets required intense focus. I examined the aerodynamic drag on turbine blades, calculating how they harnessed turbulent, destructive weather and transformed that raw chaos into usable power. The irony brought a faint smile to my lips. I was doing the exact same thing with my family. I was letting their hurricane spin, taking their chaotic energy, and using it to power my own liberation. A soft ping emanated from my email client. My phone was synced to my desktop, routing voicemails through a visual transcription service. The first transcription block populated on my screen. It was Susan. Her typical composed country club tone had vanished, replaced by a shrill, breathless panic. "Kayla, pick up the phone," she shrieked. Her voice converted into stark black text on my screen. "We're at the Grand Prairie estate. Brittany was finalizing the deposit, and the electronic check bounced. The coordinator just told us the account has insufficient funds. Everyone is looking at us. Call your bank right now and clear this up." I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hands. I pictured the scene unfolding in that opulent bridal suite. I imagined the pristine white couches, the crystal chandeliers, and the polite but unyielding event coordinator holding an iPad with a glaring red error message. I pictured Brittany wearing her designer sunglasses, shrinking under the crushing weight of public humiliation. Brittany had never faced a true consequence in her 26 years of life. Whenever she faltered, my parents built a bridge over the gap. I remembered a winter piano recital when she was 12. She refused to practice for weeks and ultimately froze on stage during her performance. Instead of letting her learn a lesson about preparation, Gary marched up to the stage, grabbed the microphone, and loudly blamed the acoustics of the auditorium, pulling her off stage like a victim. They always handed her an excuse. They always paid the toll. But the Grand Prairie estate did not care about Gary's excuses. They operated on hard currency, and right now, Brittany's ledger read 0. A second transcription bubbled onto the monitor. This one was from my sister. The text read as a disjointed string of frantic sobbing. "Kayla, you need to fix this. Trent's mother is going to find out. The venue director says they are charging a $5,000 penalty fee for the return check. They are going to blacklist me from the caterers. Mom is crying. Dad is yelling at the manager, "Give me my money. Give me my money." The sheer entitlement embedded in that final sentence was staggering. She truly believed the $85,000 sitting in my high-yield account belonged to her simply because she wanted it. She felt entitled to the fruits of my labor because our parents had always presented my achievements as family property. The final transcription arrived a minute later. Gary. His words were clipped, radiating a rigid, hostile authority. "Kayla, call me the second you get this. There's some kind of administrative hold on the joint account. The teller on the phone refused to give me any information, claiming I failed the security protocols. You need to call your branch manager and authorize the release of our funds. Do not make me come down there." I read Gary's words, letting the sheer delusion wash over me. He genuinely believed this was a simple banking error. He thought a random algorithm had temporarily paused his transaction. He did not possess the self-awareness to realize he had triggered a federal fraud investigation. He thought he could bully the financial system the same way he bullied his wife and daughters. He thought a stern phone call would magically unlock the vault. I did not reply. I did not text back. I let the silence stretch out, turning it into a weapon. By refusing to engage, I was starving the parasite. Every minute that passed without a response amplified their panic. They were trapped in a luxurious waiting room, surrounded by wedding coordinators who were rapidly losing their polite smiles. At noon, I walked to the corporate cafeteria and purchased a crisp green salad and a sparkling water. I sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the Des Moines traffic crawl along the interstate. My pulse was steady, my breathing was calm. For the first time in my life, I was not rushing to put out their fires. I was sitting, safely behind fireproof glass, watching the flames consume the facade they had spent decades building. I returned to my desk and spent the next 4 hours finalizing the turbine efficiency report. My phone remained face down. The transcriptions continued to roll in, growing increasingly frantic and disjointed. Susan begged, Brittany threatened, Gary demanded. The spectrum of their manipulation tactics played out in real time, but none of it penetrated my perimeter. I formatted my spreadsheets, double-checked my calculations, and hit send on the final email to my department head. The clock struck 5. The workday was over. I neatly arranged my desk, slipping my laptop into my leather tote bag. I finally picked up my phone. 32 missed calls, 17 text messages, 7 voicemails. I cleared the notifications with a single swipe of my thumb, tossing the device into my bag. The parking garage was cool and dim, echoing with the sound of engines starting and tires rolling over concrete. I climbed into my practical, paid-off sedan and started the ignition. The drive back to my townhouse took 20 minutes. The evening traffic provided a soothing, predictable rhythm. The setting sun cast a golden hue over the suburban neighborhoods, painting the world in warm, inviting colors. As I navigated the familiar turns leading to my street, my analytical mind shifted into a new gear. The silence of the workday had served its purpose. It had let their panic simmer and boil over. But I knew Gary and Susan. They were not the type of people to accept defeat quietly. When they could not reach me digitally, they would resort to physical intimidation. They would seek out the one place they knew they could find me. I turned the final corner onto my quiet tree-lined street. My townhouse sat near the end of the cul-de-sac, a modest 2-story brick building with a small, manicured front lawn. The serene picture was shattered instantly. Parked diagonally across my driveway, blocking access to my garage, was a silver crossover SUV, Gary's vehicle. The engine was off, but the doors were flung wide open. 2 figures paced relentlessly on the concrete porch, their silhouettes dark and rigid against the fading evening light. The grace period was over. The storm had arrived at my front door. I shifted my sedan into park along the street, curbing the tires, since the silver crossover SUV occupied my entire driveway. Before my engine even fully cut off, Gary and Susan were already marching down the concrete path. Their shadows stretched long and distorted under the amber glow of the early evening streetlights. The serene quiet of my suburban cul-de-sac provided a sharp contrast to the fierce domestic dispute brewing on my front lawn. Gary wore the same crisp blue polo from the barbecue, but the collar was now dark with sweat. His face held a mottled shade of crimson, a stark departure from his usual composed country club demeanor. Susan trailed a half step behind him, clutching her designer handbag like a shield against her chest. Her immaculate straw hat was gone, and a few stray hairs stuck to her damp forehead. They looked like people who had just spent the last 6 hours watching their curated reality crumble.
"Where have you been, Gary?"
Bellowed his voice, echoing off the brick facade of my townhouse.
"We have been calling you all day."
I slung my leather tote over my shoulder and locked my car doors. The electronic beep chirped in the quiet neighborhood. I walked up the driveway, meeting them halfway. My pulse maintained a steady, measured rhythm. "I was at work, Dad," I replied, keeping my tone professional and detached. "Earning a living."
"Do not use that tone with us,"
Susan shrieked, stepping out from behind his shadow.
"Do you have any idea what we went through this morning? The event coordinator at the Grand Prairie Estate treated us like common beggars. They declined the electronic check in front of 3 other couples who were touring the grounds. Brittany was sobbing in the bridal suite. You need to call your bank branch right now and fix this glitch."
The teller refused to speak with me. Gary interrupted, taking a heavy step forward. He claimed I failed the security protocol and locked me out of the automated system. "Get your phone out, Kayla. Call the fraud department and tell them to release the hold on our money." I stood on my own front walkway, gripping the strap of my bag. They were so blinded by their own entitlement, they truly believed I would just obey. They expected me to pull out my smartphone, punch in a few numbers, and hand over my life savings just to soothe their temporary embarrassment. "I have a question first," I said, letting the evening breeze cool the back of my neck. "That joint account was shuttered 3 years ago when I secured the mortgage for this house. I moved all my assets to a solo high-yield vault. So tell me, how exactly did you bypass the dual-factor authentication to initiate a wire transfer?" Gary scoffed, waving a thick hand in the air as if waving away a pesky insect. "You think you are the only one who understands computers? You left your old university laptop in the basement when you moved out. I kept it around to tinker with the hardware. I fired it up last week to check the specs and noticed your web browser was still logged in. Your password manager auto-filled everything. It took me 2 minutes to bypass the login screen and initiate the transfer." My old university laptop. I remembered buying that heavy silver machine with my own tips from the diner. I had explicitly asked Gary to drop it off at an electronics recycling drive months ago. Instead, he hoarded it, viewing it as a potential access point. Growing up, he constantly read my mail and checked my phone records under the guise of parenting. He felt entitled to my digital life, just as he felt entitled to my financial labor. He thought his snooping was a clever administrative workaround. "You did not bypass a login screen, Dad," I replied, my voice dropping to a low, chilling register. "You accessed a secured financial portal by pretending to be me." "I am your father," Gary fired back, his chest puffing out in a desperate display of authority. "I am listed on your birth certificate. We raised you. It is family money." "It is identity theft." I stated the words hanging in the humid air, heavy and undeniable. "You used my saved credentials to authorize a transaction under my name without my consent. You spoofed my identity to drain my life savings." "Do not use legal jargon with me," Gary sneered, though his eyes darted nervously toward the street.
I just navigated a workaround. It was a simple administrative shortcut to get Brittany her venue deposit. The bank does not recognize administrative shortcuts, I explained, my analytical mind dissecting his crime piece by piece. They recognize digital footprints. When you clicked submit, the system logged the IP address. It flagged the residential location and the obsolete device ID. It also noted that the security questions were failed before your password manager overrode the prompt. You left a glowing neon trail leading directly back to your basement router. Gary's jaw slackened. The mottled crimson color began to drain from his cheeks, leaving a sickly grayish pallor in its place. The arrogant patriarch who had spent his afternoon bragging about his generational wealth to the neighbors was suddenly realizing the gravity of his actions. Furthermore, I continued refusing to give him a single second to recover. My bank is headquartered in Illinois. We are standing in Iowa. When you used a computer to steal credentials and initiate an $85,000 transfer across state lines, you did not just commit a local misdemeanor. You committed federal wire fraud. The power dynamic shifted with staggering force. Gary was not a clever mastermind outsmarting a rigid banking system. He was a documented thief who had just confessed his exact methodology out loud. He took a stumbling step backward, his dress shoes crunching against the gravel bordering the concrete path.
"Kayla, stop this nonsense right now," Susan interjected, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. "You are scaring your father. Just call the bank and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you gave him permission to use the laptop. We can clear this up before it goes any further."
"I cannot do that, Mom," I said, looking her directly in the eyes, "because I already spoke with Evan Thorne from the fraud prevention unit this morning. I officially confirmed that the transfer request was unauthorized. The bank has permanently voided the wire and locked down the perimeter. They are already compiling the incident report."
"You reported me."
Gary choked out the words, his breathing shallow and rapid. He looked at me as if I had just morphed into a terrifying stranger. "You reported your own flesh and blood to a bank." "I simply answered a question honestly," I replied. "The system flagged a crime and I confirmed the data." Gary stood paralyzed, entirely stripped of his bluster and false confidence. He realized his fate was now tumbling through the gears of a massive, unforgiving financial bureaucracy. The vault was sealed and the alarms were ringing, but Susan was not ready to surrender. Recognizing that logic and law had utterly defeated her husband, she pivoted instantly. If she could not bully me with parental authority, she would resort to nuclear emotional warfare. Her eyes narrowed, transforming her panic into a sharp, focused hostility. "You think you are so smart," Susan hissed, taking a deliberate step toward my front porch. "You think you can just send your father to jail and walk away scot-free? You forgot who you are dealing with, Kayla. I know exactly how much you value that fancy corporate job of yours. I know you are up for that vice president of data analytics promotion next month." I stood my ground, watching her desperate mind calculate a new angle of attack. The VP role at my agriculture tech firm was the culmination of a decade of relentless grinding. It came with a substantial salary increase, equity shares, and a strict corporate morality clause. "If you do not call that bank and drop these ridiculous fraud claims by tomorrow morning," Susan threatened her, voice dripping with venom, "I am going to call your human resources department. I am going to tell your CEO that you are financially abusing your own family. I will launch a smear campaign so loud they will have no choice but to fire you to protect their public image. I will make sure everyone in Des Moines knows exactly what a selfish, treacherous daughter you really are." The threat hung in the thick evening air, suffocating and dense. Susan stood on the concrete pathway, her chest heaving with desperate exertion. Her eyes were wide and frantic, stripped of their usual polished country club charm. She had just deployed her ultimate weapon.
She knew my career was the single untouchable pillar in my life, and she was preparing to strike it with a sledgehammer.
I felt a sudden cold knot form deep in my stomach.
The vice president of data analytics position was not just a job title. It was the culmination of a decade of relentless grinding. It represented thousands of hours spent staring at spreadsheets, analyzing topsoil degradation, and proving my worth in a male-dominated agriculture tech industry. The promotion included equity shares, a substantial salary increase, and a prominent seat at the executive table. It also carried a strict public morality and character clause. The firm served conservative farming conglomerates and international agricultural boards. They required their leadership team to maintain an impeccable public image, devoid of scandal or controversy. My mother knew this. I had shared the details of my upcoming promotion during a rare moment of vulnerability at Thanksgiving, hoping for a shred of parental pride. Instead, she had filed the information away, cataloging it as a future weapon. I felt a cold bead of sweat trace a path down my spine. The heavy architecture of guilt built brick by brick over 29 years groaned under the sudden weight of her ultimatum. My hands began to tremble. I pressed my fingernails into my palms, grounding myself with the sharp sting. Susan watched my reaction. She saw the microscopic shift in my posture, the slight widening of my eyes. A triumphant smirk crept across her face, replacing the frantic panic from moments ago. She stepped closer, her designer perfume masking the scent of the evening dew. "I will call Patricia Evans first thing tomorrow morning," Susan hissed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I remember the name of your human resources director, Kayla. I will tell Patricia that you are withholding your sister's wedding funds out of petty jealousy. I will cry on the phone. I will explain how you manipulated your father into accessing that account, and how you are now trying to frame him. Who do you think they will believe? A distraught mother fighting for her family, or a cold, calculating data analyst who turns on her own blood?" Gary puffed out his chest, his earlier terror evaporating as he sensed my hesitation. "Your mother is not making an idle threat," he added, taking his place beside her. "We do not want to ruin your career, Kayla. We just want what belongs to the family. Unlock the account. Transfer the deposit to the venue. You can keep the rest. We are being generous here." Generous. The word echoed in my mind. They were offering to steal only half of my life savings in exchange for my professional survival. The old conditioning screamed at me to surrender. It was the survival mechanism I had relied on since childhood. Whenever they demanded a sacrifice, I yielded. I paid for Brittany's textbooks when I was eating instant noodles. I gave up my high school graduation party so they could afford her cheerleading camp. Yielding brought temporary peace. It stopped the screaming. If I just pulled out my phone and called the fraud department, I could make the immediate danger disappear. I could save my VP promotion and absorb the financial hit. My thumb hovered over the edge of my leather tote bag, where my phone rested inside. Then the analytical engine in my brain engaged. The data scientist took over, isolating the variables and running a ruthless risk assessment. If I paid the ransom, I would not just lose $40,000. I would validate their extortion. I would teach them that my career was a hostage they could leverage whenever Brittany needed a bailout. The demands would never stop. They would drain my accounts until there was nothing left but dust. I evaluated the actual threat. What happens when a frantic outsider calls a corporate human resources department to report a personal family dispute? Patricia Evans handled multi-million-dollar compliance laws, corporate espionage, and international labor regulations. Her primary directive was protecting the firm from legal liability. If Susan called the corporate office claiming I was framing my father for wire fraud, she would inadvertently confess to the crime on a recorded business line. She would provide the company lawyers with documented proof of her own extortion attempt. Susan thought she was wielding a nuclear launch key. She was actually holding a live grenade with a pulled pin. The trembling in my hands ceased. The cold knot of panic in my stomach dissolved, replaced by a sharp, chilling clarity. I let go of my tote bag strap and stood perfectly straight, locking my knees. "Do it," I said, my voice slicing through the quiet evening air like a scalpel. Susan's triumphant smirk vanished. She blinked her brow, furrowing in genuine confusion. "What did you say?" "I said you should make the call, Mom," I replied, taking a deliberate step toward her. "Call Patricia Evans tomorrow morning. Dial the corporate directory. Tell her exactly what happened today. Tell her you and Dad booted up my old university laptop, accessed my saved passwords, and attempted to initiate an unauthorized wire transfer across state lines. Explain to her that the bank flagged the transaction as fraudulent and froze the account. And then, make sure you tell her you are demanding I release those funds under the threat of professional sabotage." Gary let out a low, breathless sound. His business instincts, however flawed, were finally catching up to the reality of the situation. He recognized the concept of corporate liability. He understood extortion. "Susan," he muttered, reaching out to grasp her elbow. "We cannot call her job. That is corporate interference. Her firm has a legal team on retainer. We could get sued." Susan yanked her arm away from his grip, her desperation spiraling into pure, toxic panic. "I am not afraid of her corporate lawyers," she shrieked, though her voice shook, betraying her terror. "I am her mother. I have the right to protect my family." "You do not have a family anymore," I stated, the words landing like heavy stones on the concrete path. "You operate a criminal conspiracy, and if you dial my office directory, I will not just let security handle it, I will personally take the recorded voicemail straight to the federal investigators handling the bank fraud. It will add an extortion charge to Dad's impending indictment." The silence that followed was profound. The ambient hum of the neighborhood cicadas seemed to amplify, filling the vast empty space between us. Susan stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, unable to formulate a single counter-argument. The realization that she possessed zero leverage washed over her, visible in the sudden slump of her shoulders. She had played her final card, and it had turned to dust in her hands. Gary grabbed Susan's arm again, this time with a firm, unyielding grip. "We are leaving," he commanded, his voice hollow and defeated. He pulled her toward the parked silver crossover. He did not look back at me. He just wanted to escape the scene of his own destruction. I stood on my porch and watched them climb into their vehicle. The engine roared to life, shattering the quiet evening air. The SUV reversed out of my driveway with a screech of tires disappearing down the suburban street and leaving a faint cloud of exhaust in its wake. I unlocked my front door and stepped into the cool, dark sanctuary of my townhouse. The deadbolt clicked shut with a satisfying finality. I had successfully repelled their assault, navigating the emotional minefield without detonating a single charge. My career was safe. My savings were secure. The boundaries I had established were impenetrable. I walked into my home office and set my leather bag on the desk. I pulled out my work laptop and opened a new email draft addressed directly to Patricia Evans. I was not going to wait for Susan to test her luck tomorrow morning. I was going to control the narrative. I typed a concise, professional message detailing a potential security risk from estranged family members, warning HR to log any harassing phone calls for police records. I hit send, ensuring my professional armor was locked into place before the sun even rose. As I closed the laptop lid, a new calculation formed in my mind. The financial host had officially severed the parasite. Gary and Susan were retreating to assess the legal damage, but they were only half of the equation. Somewhere in a luxury apartment across town, Brittany was waiting for a phone call that would never come. She was sitting on a canceled venue contract and a $5,000 penalty fee. Without my stolen money to prop up her illusion, her manufactured reality was currently collapsing. A starving parasite does not just fade away quietly. It lashes out, seeking any available source of nourishment. The parents had failed to secure the bag. The golden child would be next. And she was going to be desperate. Tuesday morning arrived with the pale, soft light of an Iowa dawn. The neighborhood was quiet, bathed in the serene tranquility that preceded the daily suburban rush. I sat at my kitchen island drinking a cup of dark roast coffee. My tablet displayed the latest crop yield projections from a local farming cooperative. My life was orderly, structured, and entirely within my control. The sterile calm of my home provided a stark contrast to the emotional wreckage my family was currently navigating across town.
The peace shattered at 7:15.
A rapid, frantic pounding echoed from my front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the desperate hammering of someone whose world was actively caving in. I set my coffee mug down on the granite counter. I did not rush. I walked measured and calm through the hallway and unlocked the deadbolt. I pulled the heavy door open. Brittany stood on my welcome mat. The radiant, confident bride from the summer barbecue was gone. Her appearance was jarring. She wore wrinkled gray sweatpants and an oversized college hoodie that looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of a laundry hamper. Her designer sunglasses were missing, revealing bloodshot eyes and dark streaks of smeared mascara trailing down her pale cheeks. She was trembling, clutching her smartphone to her chest like a lifeline.
The venue canceled my date. Brittany choked out, her voice raspy and thin. I leaned against the doorframe, observing her panic with the detached curiosity of a scientist viewing a petri dish. I did not invite her inside. My home was a sanctuary, and she was a contaminant. They sent an official email this morning, she continued, holding the phone out toward my face. Her hands shook so badly I could barely read the text on the glowing screen. The Grand Prairie estate notified her of an immediate breach of contract. Due to the returned electronic check, they had permanently revoked her reservation for the October date. Below the cancellation notice was a formal invoice demanding a $5,000 penalty fee due within 48 hours. If the fee remained unpaid, the venue threatened to send the debt to a collections agency and blacklist her from every premier vendor in the state.
Trent is asking questions, Kayla. She sobbed, wiping a streak of black makeup off her cheek with the back of her sleeve. His mother called Susan last night, demanding to know why the funds bounced. I told them it was a bank error, but they do not believe me. You have to fix this. You have to give me the money. She looked up at me with wide, pleading eyes. It was the exact expression she had used since childhood, whenever she broke a vase, failed a test, or crashed a car. It was the look that always prompted Gary and Susan to swoop in with their wallets open, ready to shield her from the consequences of her own actions.
I will pay you back, Brittany pleaded, her voice cracking. I promise. Just write me a cashier check for the $40,000 deposit and another $5,000 for the penalty. I will sign a contract. I will pay you every single month. I just need you to save the wedding.
I looked at my younger sister, analyzing her desperate pledge. If I were a weaker person, the tears might have worked. The heavy conditioning of my youth might have urged me to rescue her. But my analytical mind processed her words and found zero empirical evidence to support her promise. You will pay me back, I repeated, my tone flat and devoid of sympathy. With what income, Brittany? She flinched, taking a half step back on the concrete porch. I am looking for a job, she stammered defensively. Trent has connections. I can get hired somewhere next week. I crossed my arms over my chest, shutting down her delusion. You are 26 years old, I stated, letting the cold facts hang in the morning air. You have never held a position for more than 6 months. You quit the boutique agency in Des Moines because you said the manager expected you to arrive too early. You dropped out of the real estate licensing course because the reading material was too dense. You currently have 3 credit cards maxed out to their limits, funding designer clothes and spa treatments you cannot afford. Our parents have been quietly paying your minimum balances for 2 years
just to keep your credit score from flatlining.
Brittany opened her mouth to argue, but no words emerged. The truth stripped away her defenses, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. You have 0 assets, 0 reliable income, and 0 work ethic, I continued, refusing to let her look away from the reality of her own existence. You are a financial liability. Loaning you $45,000 is not an investment, it is a donation to a sinking ship, and I do not finance sinking ships. The sorrow on her face evaporated. The pleading victim routine dissolved, revealing the fierce, toxic entitlement lingering underneath. Her tears stopped flowing. Her posture stiffened and her face contorted into a mask of pure resentment. "You are just jealous," she spat, her voice rising to a shrill shriek. "You have always been jealous of me." I watched her mask slip, finding a strange sense of satisfaction in her anger. The truth always forced the poison to the surface.
You sit in this boring little house all by yourself looking at dirt on a computer screen, Brittany yelled, waving her hands frantically.
You do not have a fiancé. You do not have a social life. You are just a bitter spinster who cannot stand the fact that I am marrying into a prominent family. You want to ruin my wedding because you know you will never have one of your own.
Her insults bounced off my armor. She was attempting to strike at my insecurities, using the exact language our parents had fed her for years. They had trained her to believe my independence was a flaw and her dependency was a virtue. "You can call me bitter," I replied, my voice remaining perfectly level. "But I own this boring little house, I pay my own bills, and I never have to forge a signature to fund my life." Brittany let out a visceral, frustrated scream. She stomped her foot against the concrete porch like a petulant toddler. She turned and marched onto my manicured lawn, tearing at her hair. "You are a monster!" she shrieked, spinning around to face me from the grass. "You are dead to me, Kayla. You are dead to this entire family." I watched her throw her tantrum on the front lawn. A few doors down, my neighbor stepped out to grab his morning paper, pausing to stare at the disheveled woman screaming in my yard. Brittany did not care about the audience. She was spiraling, realizing the vacuum of competence she lived in was finally collapsing in on itself. The financial host had severed the connection, and the parasite was suffocating. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a parting insult. I simply stepped back into my quiet, orderly hallway and pushed the heavy wooden door shut. The deadbolt clicked into place, sealing her outside. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up my coffee mug, taking a slow sip. The silence inside my home was profound. I gathered my leather tote bag and my car keys, preparing to leave for the office. I had successfully navigated the morning ambush, but I knew the war was far from over. I pulled my phone from my pocket to check the traffic report on my commute. A new notification glowed on the lock screen. It was an automated message from my corporate email client. An urgent calendar invitation had just been added to my schedule for 9 o'clock sharp. The sender was the executive assistant to the chief executive officer of my agriculture tech firm. The location was the top floor boardroom. The subject line contained only 2 words: personnel matter. My pulse skipped a single beat. The threat Susan had made the previous evening on my driveway had apparently materialized. She had executed her nuclear option. She had contacted my corporate headquarters. I locked my phone and walked out to my car, knowing my carefully constructed professional empire was about to face its ultimate test. The drive into downtown Des Moines felt like a steady march toward the gallows. The morning sun reflected off the sleek glass facades of the city skyline, projecting harsh, geometric shadows across the pavement. I navigated my sedan into the underground parking structure of the agriculture tech headquarters, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The calendar notification pulsing on my phone screen felt like a digital death warrant. A personnel matter scheduled for 9 in the morning on the executive floor rarely ended with a handshake and a smile. My mother had promised to detonate my career, and it appeared she had found the trigger. I rode the silent elevator up to the 12th floor. The brushed steel doors slid open to reveal a pristine lobby decorated with minimalist leather furniture and panoramic windows overlooking the sprawling Iowa farmland. Usually, this view grounded me. It reminded me of the tangible earth, the data, the undeniable truth of soil and roots. Today, the landscape just looked distant and unreachable. I approached the heavy frosted glass doors of the main boardroom. I did not hesitate. I pushed them open and stepped inside, channeling every ounce of cold detachment I possessed. If my professional empire was going to burn, I refused to watch it turn to ash with a trembling lip or a lowered gaze. The room was cavernous, centered around a long, polished mahogany table. At the far end sat Mitchell Grant, the chief executive officer. He was a formidable presence, a man who had built his reputation on ruthless efficiency and zero tolerance for corporate liability. Beside him sat Patricia Evans, the director of human resources. Her expression was unreadable, a stony mask of practiced neutrality. Neither of them smiled when I walked in. The air felt thin, suffocating, and heavy with unspoken implications. "Take a seat," Kayla Mitchell instructed, gesturing to the empty leather chair positioned directly across from them. His tone was clipped, strictly business. I sat down, folding my hands neatly in my lap. I kept my spine straight, ensuring my posture communicated unyielding confidence. The silence stretched for a few agonizing seconds, mimicking the tense atmosphere of a courtroom right before the verdict is read aloud. Patricia unclasped a manila folder resting in front of her. At 6:15 this morning, our emergency corporate hotline received a highly unusual voicemail, she began, her voice echoing slightly in the large room. The caller identified herself as your mother, Susan Stone. The recording lasted 4 minutes. It was highly emotional, highly erratic, and contained severe allegations regarding your personal conduct. My chest tightened. Susan had actually done it. She had weaponized her tears and aimed them directly at my livelihood. According to the caller, Patricia continued reading from a transcribed document. "You are currently engaged in a coordinated effort to financially ruin your younger sister days before her wedding. She claimed you manipulated your father into a banking error and are now using that glitch to hold family funds hostage. She explicitly demanded that we review your character clause, stating that someone so cruel and vindictive has no place in a senior leadership role at this firm." The words hung in the sterile air. The impending promotion to vice president of data analytics seemed to dissolve right in front of my eyes. The equity shares, the corner office, the validation of a decade of grueling labor were all slipping through my fingers. My mother had successfully imported her toxic chaos into my professional sanctuary. I took a slow, measured breath, preparing to launch my defense. I needed to explain the identity theft, the stolen credentials, the federal wire fraud flags. I opened my mouth to speak, to lay out the raw data of their crimes. Mitchell raised a single hand, palm facing outward, stopping me before I could utter a single syllable. "You do not need to defend yourself, Kayla," he said, his voice shifting, shedding the stern executive tone and softening into something entirely unexpected. I blinked, my analytical brain stalling for a fraction of a second. I looked at Patricia, who was now closing the folder and offering a small, reassuring nod. "We ran the audio file through our risk management protocol," Mitchell explained, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the mahogany surface. "We deal with high-stakes negotiations, corporate espionage, and unstable contractors every single day. We know what a targeted smear campaign sounds like. Your mother was hysterical, but she was also sloppy. During her rant, she specifically mentioned bypassing digital security protocols and complained about frozen bank assets. She practically confessed to financial cybercrime on a recorded line." The knot of dread in my stomach began to unravel, replaced by a staggering wave of disbelief. They were not firing me. They were not invoking the morality clause. Patricia leaned in, her expression transforming from rigid neutrality to profound empathy. Kayla, we are aware that family dynamics can be complex, but what we heard on that tape was not a mother expressing genuine concern. It was a textbook extortion attempt. She was trying to use your employment as leverage to force a financial payout. We have zero tolerance for anyone who threatens our personnel. The contrast hit me with the force of a physical blow. For 29 years, my biological relatives had viewed me as a utility. They saw my accomplishments as resources to be harvested, and my boundaries as inconveniences to be bulldozed. When I finally said no, they immediately tried to destroy me. But here, in this sterile boardroom, surrounded by corporate executives, I was experiencing actual, genuine validation. My leaders did not see a rebellious daughter. They saw a brilliant data analyst, a vital cornerstone of their organization. They valued my intellect, my dedication, and my reality. They were looking at the same toxic topsoil my parents tried to sell, and they immediately recognized the rot underneath. We did not call you in here to reprimand you, Mitchell stated, his gaze locked onto mine with fierce, unwavering support. We called you in here to protect our incoming vice president. He slid a thick bound document across the polished wood. I looked down at the embossed logo of the firm's retained legal counsel, one of the most ruthless and expensive law firms in the state of Iowa. This is Jonathan Reed Mitchell continued, pointing to the business card clipped to the front page. He is our lead corporate attorney. I have already briefed him on the situation. If you say the word, he will draft a comprehensive cease and desist order by noon. We will put the full weight of this company behind a restraining order, barring Gary and Susan Stone from ever contacting you, this office, or our affiliates again. The firm will cover all legal fees. You are part of our team, Kayla. We protect our own. I stared at the pristine legal document. My hands, which had been gripping each other tight enough to bruise, slowly relaxed. I reached out and rested my fingertips against the heavy cardstock. The architecture of guilt that had dominated my entire existence was not just crumbling. It was being systematically dismantled by an army of corporate lawyers. I had spent my morning bracing for a devastating professional execution. Instead, I was being handed an impenetrable shield. I looked up, meeting Mitchell's eyes. I accept, I said, my voice ringing clear and steady, without a single tremor of fear. Tell Jonathan Reed to draft the papers. An hour later, I walked out of the executive suite feeling lighter than I had in decades. The heavy, suffocating fog of familial obligation had evaporated, leaving a sharp, crystalline focus in its wake. Armed with the backing of a multi-million-dollar corporation, I was no longer a solitary target. I was an untouchable force. I stepped into the elevator and pulled my phone from my pocket, checking my encrypted messages. The screen was remarkably quiet. After yesterday's barrage of panic and threats, Gary and Susan had gone entirely silent. Brittany had not sent a single insulting text since her tantrum on my lawn. The sudden radio silence was not a surrender. It was a pivot. My analytical mind calculated their next move instantly. If they could not crack my bank vault, and they could not destroy my career, they were out of options on my battlefield. They needed immediate social validation and financial rescue. They were shifting their focus to the only remaining target that could salvage their sinking ship. I opened my calendar app and checked the date. It was Thursday. Tomorrow evening, Trent's parents were hosting a lavish, formal dinner at their sprawling country estate to celebrate the upcoming nuptials. My parents were going to walk into that opulent dining room wearing their finest clothes, desperate to keep the illusion alive. They were going to try and hustle a prominent, wealthy family while a federal fraud investigation breathed down their necks. The true social execution was approaching. and I did not even need to light the match. I just needed to watch them walk straight into the fire. Friday evening arrived, draped in the heavy golden light of an Iowa sunset. The Collins family estate sat on 50 acres of pristine, manicured land just outside the city limits. It was a sprawling stone mansion with a sweeping circular driveway and towering oak trees. Gary and Susan parked their silver crossover near a tiered water fountain, attempting to project an aura of generational prosperity. They walked up the grand steps, wearing forced smiles, hiding the desperate terror boiling beneath their polished exterior. Inside, the grand dining room featured a long, polished oak table set with fine china and delicate crystal glassware. Victor Collins sat at the head of the table, radiating the quiet, formidable power of a self-made industrialist. He had built a lucrative manufacturing empire, specializing in heavy agricultural machinery. He was a man who understood leverage, supply chains, and the harsh reality of a balance sheet. Beside him sat his wife, Eleanor, a woman whose polite smile masked a fierce, protective instinct for her family wealth. Trent sat next to Brittany. Brittany looked pale and rigid. Her usual radiant confidence had vanished, replaced by a frantic, nervous energy. She wore a designer dress she could not afford, sipping her water with trembling hands. She knew her manufactured reality was hanging by a thread. The first course arrived. A tense silence hung over the silver soup bowls. The polite country club chatter had evaporated. Victor wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and placed it neatly beside his plate. He cleared his throat in a low, rumbling sound that commanded immediate attention. He looked directly across the table at my father. Victor brought up the incident at the venue. He mentioned the bounced deposit, the canceled reservation, and the glaring penalty fee. His tone was measured, lacking any overt hostility, but carrying the weight of an incoming storm. He asked Gary for a direct explanation regarding the sudden lack of funds. Gary swallowed hard. A bead of sweat formed at his temple, catching the warm light of the crystal chandelier overhead. He loosened his silk tie and launched into a meticulously rehearsed explanation. Gary spun a complex tale about a family trust fund structure. He claimed the money was temporarily frozen due to a sudden tax technicality. He used financial jargon to construct a smokescreen, citing bureaucratic red tape and rigid federal regulations. He painted himself as a wealthy patriarch temporarily inconvenienced by a rigid banking algorithm. Susan chimed in, offering a high-pitched, nervous laugh. She blamed the financial institution for being overly cautious. She assured Eleanor that the funds would clear by Monday, and the wedding plans would resume without a hitch. She tried to steer the conversation toward floral arrangements and catering menus, hoping to bury the financial discrepancy under a mountain of wedding aesthetics. Victor let them speak. He let them build their elaborate house of cards right there in his dining room. He watched Gary gesture expansively and listened to Susan weave her desperate web of lies. He waited until they had dug a deep, inescapable trench of deception. Then Victor reached down beside his chair. He retrieved a plain manila folder and placed it onto the polished oak surface. The dull thud of the cardboard hitting the wood silenced the entire room. Victor opened the folder, revealing a stack of printed reports. He looked at Gary, his expression shifting from polite host to a ruthless corporate interrogator. Victor explained that his manufacturing firm held its primary corporate accounts at a specific financial institution. It was the exact same institution where I held my personal accounts. He revealed that he did not just bank there. He sat on the regional board of directors for that very branch. Gary's face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. His jaw slackened. The polished patriarch illusion shattered instantly, leaving behind a terrified, cornered fraud. Victor stated that when a local luxury venue reported a bounce check of that magnitude connected to his future daughter-in-law, he made a discreet phone call to the branch manager. He wanted to resolve the issue quietly to protect his family reputation. He expected to find a simple accounting error or a misrouted routing number. Instead, he uncovered a blazing digital fire. Victor read from the printed report. He explicitly stated there was no trust fund. He revealed that the bank had frozen the transaction because the fraud department flagged an unauthorized wire transfer. The internal system recognized stolen digital credentials and halted the theft before the money could leave the original account. The social execution detonated right over the dinner plates. The curated image of the wealthy Stone family incinerated into ash. Gary was trapped in a room with a man who held the keys to the very financial institution actively investigating his crime. The lie he spun had collided head-on with irrefutable, documented truth. Eleanor dropped her silver spoon. It clattered loudly against her china bowl. She stared at Susan with pure, unadulterated revulsion. The polite Midwestern hospitality vanished from her eyes. She demanded to know why they were trying to fund a luxury wedding with stolen money. She asked Susan if they were bankrupt, trying to trap her son into a marriage to secure a financial bailout. Susan opened her mouth, but only a hollow, breathless gasp escaped. Her elegant facade crumpled. She shrank back into her chair, unable to defend herself against the crushing weight of the evidence. Trent pulled his hand away from Brittany. He looked at his fiancée as if she were a stranger who had just broken into his home. The realization that he was binding himself to a family of financial predators washed over him. Brittany reached for his arm, tears welling in her eyes, begging him to listen to her. Trent pushed his chair back, shaking his head in silent horror. Gary realized the walls had closed in. His social standing, his reputation, his entire life was imploding in a spectacular public fashion. The wealthy industrialist sitting across from him was not just a concerned father. He was a board member who possessed the power to accelerate the federal inquiry. Gary stood up his chair, scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. His breathing was ragged, his chest heaving under his sweat-soaked shirt. He muttered a disjointed apology and excused himself from the table. He stumbled out of the grand dining room and retreated into the opulent hallway, blindly searching for an exit. He leaned against the cold stone wall of the corridor, pulling his smartphone from his pocket with trembling fingers. His mind raced frantically, searching for any possible escape route. He realized there was only one person on Earth who could stop the investigation and salvage the wreckage of his life. He scrolled through his contacts and pressed dial, preparing to launch a desperate plea to the daughter he had spent his entire life trying to destroy. I sat in the quiet sanctuary of my living room, staring at the glowing screen of my phone as the incoming call illuminated the dark room. The caller ID displayed my father's name. The trap had sprung. The social collapse was complete, and now the true relational reckoning was about to begin. The phone vibrated against the tempered glass of my coffee table, emitting a low, persistent hum that disrupted the quiet sanctuary of my living room. I sat on the gray linen sofa, watching the caller identification flash across the screen. My father's name glowed in the dim evening light. I did not reach for the device. I leaned back into the cushions, crossing my arms and let the digital chime ring out until it finally clicked over to the automated answering service. A minute later, a new notification appeared, indicating a recorded message. I tapped the screen and pressed play, placing the speaker on the highest volume setting. Gary's voice filled the room, but it lacked the booming, authoritative resonance he usually projected. Instead, he sounded reedy, breathless, and cornered. The ambient noise of a grand, echoing hallway leaked through the audio, indicating he had fled the dining room to make this desperate plea. "Kayla, please pick up," Gary stammered, his words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. "We have a severe situation here at the Collins estate. Victor knows about the frozen bank account. He sits on the regional board of your branch. He ambushed us at dinner and asked about the venue deposit.
I had to tell him the money was tied up in a family trust fund glitch. I need you to call him right now. Tell him you are the trustee. Tell him it was a simple tax misunderstanding and the funds will be released by Monday. Your sister is sobbing at the table, Kayla. Trent is walking away. You have to fix this. Just back up my story and we will never ask you for another dime. I am begging you. The recording ended with a sharp click, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I sat motionless, dissecting the voicemail with the detached precision of a surgeon. The sheer audacity of his request was staggering. My father had committed identity theft to drain my life savings, and now he wanted me to commit perjury to a financial board member to shield him from the consequences of that exact crime? He expected me to weave a fraudulent narrative to protect the manufactured reality of the golden child. This was the established dynamic of my youth, echoing into adulthood. I remembered being 15 years old when Brittany backed our mother's sedan into a neighbor's ornate brick mailbox, shattering the masonry. Gary had cornered me in the kitchen, handing me the car keys and demanding I take the blame because Brittany was competing for a local pageant queen title the following weekend and a police report would ruin her pristine image. I absorbed the punishment, the grounding, and the neighbor's wrath, while Brittany polished her tiara. I was the designated human shield, the shock absorber for their endless mistakes. The architecture of guilt whispered in the back of my mind, urging me to dial the number and weave the lie. The conditioning told me that preserving the family unit was my ultimate duty, regardless of the personal cost. But the data scientist sitting on the linen sofa refused to yield. I recognized the pattern, and I chose to break the algorithm. I opened my laptop and accessed the regional banking directory. Locating Victor Collins took less than 30 seconds. His private contact information was listed under the Board of Directors public registry. I pulled my phone from the table and typed the 10 digits onto the keypad. I did not feel a spike of adrenaline. I felt a profound, icy calm. I pressed the green call button and raised the device to my ear. The line rang twice before a deep, measured voice answered. Victor Collins speaking. Mr. Collins, I said, my tone matching his clinical professionalism. My name is Kayla Stone. I believe my father Gary is currently attending a dinner party at your home. A tense pause stretched across the cellular connection. When Victor spoke again, the polite cadence of a host had vanished, replaced by the sharp, calculating edge of an industrialist assessing a volatile situation. Ms. Stone, he replied, your parents are indeed here, though the evening has taken a rather unfortunate turn. Your father just retreated to the corridor. He claims you are managing a complex trust fund that experienced a temporary tax freeze. He insists you can verify his claims. I kept my gaze fixed on the steady amber glow of the street lamp shining outside my window. I am calling to offer you raw data, Mr. Collins, I stated, refusing to soften the blow. There is no family trust fund. There is no tax glitch. The $85,000 in question was my personal life savings held in a solo high-yield account. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The faint sound of Eleanor Collins raising her voice in the background filtered through the speaker, confirming the social implosion occurring in their dining room. 2 days ago, my father booted up an obsolete laptop I left in their basement. I continued delivering the facts with unyielding clarity. He accessed my saved password manager, spoofed my identity, and initiated an unauthorized wire transfer to fund his daughter's wedding venue. The fraud department at your institution flagged the archaic device ID and the irregular location. They froze the transaction before the theft could clear. The silence from Victor was profound. He was a man who dealt in ledgers and risk management. He recognized the stark difference between a clumsy lie spun by a desperate con artist and the verifiable timeline presented by the actual victim. Your parents sat at my table and drank my wine while trying to finance a marriage with stolen assets, Victor said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, chilling register. They looked my wife in the eye and lied.
They've spent their entire lives perfecting that specific skill, I replied. My father just left me a voicemail begging me to corroborate his trust fund narrative. He wanted me to act as a human shield, to protect their social standing and salvage the engagement. I refused. You deserve the truth, Mr. Collins. You deserve to know exactly who you are welcoming into your family tree before the ink dries on a marriage certificate. I appreciate your integrity, Miss Stone Victor stated. It is a rare commodity in this particular situation. I assume the bank is proceeding with the standard federal reporting protocols they are, I confirmed. I am meeting with the legal team on Monday morning to finalize the affidavits. I will not impede their investigation. The Stone family is going to face the full consequence of their digital footprint. Victor offered a low hum of approval. I will handle the situation on this end, he promised. Enjoy your evening, Miss Stone. The call disconnected. I lowered the phone and placed it gently back onto the glass coffee table. The final chain tethering me to the toxic swamp of my biological relatives snapped. The relational checkmate was executed with flawless precision. By handing the unvarnished truth directly to the man they most desperately wanted to impress, I had permanently incinerated their curated image. There would be no recovery from this dinner. Trent would never look at Brittany with anything other than profound revulsion. Eleanor would ensure the Stone name became synonymous with fraud in every elite social circle across the state of Iowa. Brittany had built her entire identity around the prospect of marrying into generational wealth, escaping the consequences of her chronic unemployment and credit card debt. That dream was now dead, buried under the weight of her parents' criminal arrogance and my refusal to lie. I leaned my head back against the sofa, closing my eyes, and breathing in the cool, air-conditioned breeze circulating through my home. A deep, resonant wave of catharsis washed over my chest. I had not screamed. I had not thrown a tantrum on a manicured lawn. I had simply stepped out of the way and let gravity do the work. The parasites had reached the end of their tether. The social collapse was undeniable, but the bureaucratic machinery was still churning in the background. My phone screen lit up once more, displaying a calendar reminder for Monday morning. The bank required my physical signature to seal the vault forever. The social destruction was satisfying, but the impending legal execution would ensure they could never reach me again. The financial institution was preparing the final paperwork, and I was more than ready to sign my name. Monday morning broke over Des Moines with a crisp, bright clarity that pierced through the lingering summer humidity. The downtown financial district hummed with the quiet, rhythmic energy of commerce and routine. I parked my sedan in the secure subterranean garage of the central banking headquarters. The ambient temperature dropped the moment I stepped into the polished granite lobby, a welcome reprieve from the stifling outdoor heat. I approached the private elevators designated for wealth management and corporate clients. My reflection stared back at me in the brushed steel doors. I wore a tailored navy blazer and slacks, projecting the image of a woman who dealt in hard data and unyielding boundaries. The architecture of guilt that had governed my youth was gone, replaced by the sterile, predictable framework of legal procedure. The elevator ascended to the 20th floor, opening into a sprawling suite encased in floor-to-ceiling glass. Evan Thorne stood waiting near the reception desk. He wore a crisp gray suit, his demeanor radiating the calm professional competence I had come to rely on over the past few days. He offered a firm handshake and guided me down a quiet corridor toward a corner conference room. The space was immaculate, centered around a long, polished mahogany table that smelled faintly of lemon oil and expensive leather. Large windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, ensuring the room felt both expansive and deeply private. Two other individuals waited inside. Evan introduced the older man sitting on the left as Mr. Caldwell, a senior investigator for the bank internal fraud division. Beside him sat Ms. Albright, a wealth preservation attorney I had requested Evan retain for this specific meeting. They both offered polite nods, their expressions grave and focused. We took our seats. The heavy, soundproof door clicked shut, sealing us inside a vault of corporate confidentiality. Mr. Caldwell opened a thick, leather-bound portfolio resting on the table. He did not waste time with pleasantries or sympathetic platitudes. He operated in the realm of timestamps, IP addresses, and federal statutes. Ms. Stone Caldwell began, his voice low and resonant. Over the weekend, our cyber forensics team completed a comprehensive trace on the unauthorized transaction flagged by Mr. Thorne. We verified the origin point of the login request. The digital footprint confirms the access occurred from a residential IP address registered to a Gary Stone. I kept my gaze steady, focusing on the pristine white documents stacked inside his portfolio. "I am aware," I replied. "My father admitted to booting up an archaic laptop I left at his residence. He used a saved password manager to bypass your initial security gate." Caldwell nodded, sliding a printed diagram across the mahogany surface. He pointed to a sequence of red highlighted routing numbers. By logging in under your credentials and attempting to move $85,000 out of your high-yield savings, he initiated a digital transfer protocol. Because our primary clearinghouse is located in Chicago, Illinois, those funds were scheduled to cross state lines. He leaned back in his leather chair, folding his hands together. That specific detail elevates this incident beyond a simple domestic dispute. When someone uses a telecommunications device to steal identity and attempts to route stolen funds across state borders, it triggers federal jurisdiction. The institution is legally mandated to classify this as interstate wire fraud and identity theft. The gravity of his words settled over the room. My parents had spent their entire lives treating my assets as the personal safety net, believing their title as my biological creators granted them immunity from the law. They thought they were merely taking what they were owed. They failed to realize that the United States Penal Code did not recognize familial entitlement as a valid defense for cybercrime. To proceed with our internal resolution and officially restore your account to full operational status, we require your sworn statement, Evan explained, sliding a separate manila folder toward me. We need you to verify, under penalty of perjury, that you did not authorize the wire transfer and that your credentials were compromised without your consent. Evan opened the folder, revealing a stack of legal affidavits. The pages were dense with complex bureaucratic language outlining the exact nature of the crime. A heavy silver pen rested beside the signature line. "Once you sign these documents, the bank becomes the primary injured party," Caldwell clarified, his tone turning stern. "We will formally hand the forensic evidence over to the federal authorities. The investigation will leave our hands and enter the jurisdiction of the justice system. You will not be able to retract this statement later if you experience a change of heart." I looked down at the crisp white paper. A weaker version of myself might have hesitated. The ghost of the obedient daughter might have trembled at the prospect of sending federal agents to her childhood home. But that version of me had died the moment my mother threatened to destroy my corporate career to cover her own theft. I picked up the heavy silver pen. The metal felt cool and solid against my fingers. I did not pause to weigh the emotional consequences because my family had never weighed the emotional consequences of bleeding me dry. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my full legal name. My signature was sharp, decisive, and final. I flipped to the next page and signed again, repeating the process until every single affidavit bore my authorization. I placed the pen back onto the table. The soft click of the metal hitting the wood sounded like a gavel falling. "Thank you, Miss Stone," Evan said, gathering the documents with swift efficiency. "The fraud department will process these immediately. Your funds are entirely secure." "Which brings us to the second phase of our meeting," Miss Albright interjected, speaking for the first time. The wealth preservation attorney opened her own sleek briefcase, retrieving a fresh stack of legal contracts. You requested a structural reorganization of your personal assets to prevent any future vulnerabilities.
I shifted my attention to her nodding in agreement.
My biological relatives had proven they were willing to commit felonies to access my wealth. Freezing one transaction was a temporary victory. I needed a permanent fortress. I needed to ensure that even if they miraculously avoided prison, they could never touch a single dime of my net worth again. I have drafted the foundational documents for an irrevocable living trust, Miss Albright explained, organizing the pages meticulously. By transferring your primary assets into this legal entity, you effectively relinquish direct personal ownership. The trust becomes the sole proprietor of your wealth, and you operate strictly as the designated trustee and beneficiary. She pointed a manicured finger at the primary transfer clauses. We are moving the deed to your townhouse, your corporate stock portfolio, and the entirety of your high-yield savings into this structure. Once executed, the trust forms an impenetrable legal barrier. Your parents cannot place a lien on your property. They cannot sue you for financial support under any obscure familial obligation laws. Creditors cannot target these specific assets, even if your family somehow attempts to ruin your personal credit score in retaliation. It was the ultimate bureaucratic shield. The irrevocable nature of the trust meant the drawbridge was pulled up permanently. I was building a moat filled with federal regulations and corporate lawyers. I spent the next 45 minutes reading through the dense legal framework. I verified every clause, every transfer protocol, and every protective stipulation. When I was satisfied with the ironclad parameters, I picked up the silver pen once more. I signed away my personal ownership, binding my wealth to the secure entity we had just created. The townhouse, the savings, the investments, all vanished from my direct liability and reformed behind an indestructible legal wall. Ms. Albright stamped the final page with an official notary seal. "The transaction is complete," she announced, offering a rare, genuine smile. "Your empire is officially insulated, Ms. Stone." I thanked the team, shaking each of their hands, before gathering my leather tote bag. I walked out of the corner conference room and retraced my steps down the quiet corridor. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt incredibly swift. I stepped out of the financial headquarters and into the bright Iowa morning. The heat of the day was already rising, baking the concrete sidewalks. I walked toward the parking garage, pulling my smartphone from my pocket. The screen was still quiet, devoid of the frantic threats and hysterical demands that had defined my weekend. My parents were currently sitting in their suburban home, entirely unaware that the federal machinery had just been activated against them. They thought they were merely dealing with a stubborn daughter. They had no idea they were about to face the full, crushing weight of the United States justice system. But as I unlocked my sedan, a different realization took hold. Victor Collins had promised to handle the situation on his end, following the disastrous Friday night dinner. The weekend had provided a brief, silent buffer for the wealthy industrialist to execute his own brand of social justice. Trent was a loyal son who relied heavily on his family wealth and reputation. He would never defy his father's commands, especially when faced with undeniable proof of criminal behavior. The polite society of the local elite did not tolerate public scandal, and the Stone family had just become radioactive. Brittany's curated illusion of high society luxury was currently sitting on a fault line. The financial tremor had already occurred, and the subsequent tsunami was rushing toward her shore. I slid into the driver's seat, starting the engine, and waited for the inevitable impact. The golden child was about to discover exactly what happens when the bank account runs dry and the real world demands payment. The drive back to my townhouse felt remarkably peaceful. The oppressive humidity of the Iowa afternoon had finally broken, giving way to a cool evening breeze that swept across the sprawling agricultural fields bordering the highway. I rolled down my window and let the fresh air fill the cabin of my car. For the first time in my life, The future stretched out before me, unburdened by the crushing expectations of my biological relatives. I had fortified my professional empire and insulated my financial assets behind an impenetrable wall of corporate law. My perimeter was secure. Now the only thing left to do was watch the predators turn on each other. I arrived home, brewed a cup of herbal tea, and settled onto my living room sofa. I retrieved my smartphone and opened my social media application. Usually, my feed was a continuous, curated broadcast of my younger sister's manufactured reality. Brittany posted dozens of updates every single day. Her digital footprint was a shrine to unearned luxury, featuring close-up photographs of her diamond engagement ring, champagne toasts at exclusive boutiques, and endless countdowns to her lavish October wedding. She spent hours cultivating the image of a wealthy, carefree socialite gliding effortlessly toward a perfect marriage. Tonight, her profile was eerily vacant. The daily barrage of bridal aesthetics had ceased. Her page was dark, frozen in time on a post from Thursday afternoon, displaying a stack of gold-embossed invitations that would never be mailed. The digital silence spoke volumes. Victor Collins had promised to handle the situation following the disastrous Friday night dinner, and the wealthy industrialist had executed his task with ruthless efficiency. I later learned the details through the inevitable local grapevine that permeates tight-knit Midwestern communities. Trent did not offer a tearful goodbye or a dramatic plea for couples counseling. He was a pragmatic man, raised in a family that treated reputation and capital as sacred commodities. When his father presented him with the irrefutable evidence of my parents' criminal fraud, Trent treated his relationship with my sister like a toxic asset. He liquidated it immediately. Trent arrived at Brittany's high-rise apartment on Saturday morning, accompanied by a private security contractor and his family attorney. He did not raise his voice. He simply handed her a formal document terminating their shared lease agreement for a future marital home and demanded the immediate return of the engagement ring. Brittany wept and begged, clinging to his jacket, but Trent remained cold and detached. He looked at the woman who had tried to finance their union with stolen money and saw nothing but a severe liability. He secured the diamond ring, turned his back, and walked away forever. The sudden departure of her wealthy fiancé triggered a catastrophic chain reaction from my sister. Her entire lifestyle was a fragile structure built on phantom funds and credit card debt. She resided in a premium downtown apartment complex, boasting a rooftop pool, stainless steel appliances, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Des Moines skyline. She had signed the exorbitant lease, claiming she was an independent brand consultant. In reality, Gary and Susan had been quietly paying her rent each month, drawing from their dwindling retirement funds to maintain her illusion of success. With my bank account frozen and the legal fees looming on their own horizon, my parents could no longer subsidize her luxury living. The financial host had severed the connection, and the parasite was starving. By Tuesday afternoon, the management company of the high-rise issued a notice of eviction due to insufficient funds. Brittany had no savings, no marketable skills, and no wealthy partner to rescue her from the impending ruin. She was forced to break her lease, forfeiting her security deposit and incurring thousands of dollars in early termination penalties. She packed her designer clothing and expensive cosmetics into cheap plastic garbage bags. Stripped of her pristine socialite persona, she retreated to the only place that would accept a bankrupt fraud. She moved back into my parents' cramped suburban home. I could only imagine the suffocating tension brewing inside those walls. Gary was pacing the floorboards, waiting for the bank to release a wire transfer that was never going to arrive. Susan was mourning the sudden, irreversible loss of her country club status, and Brittany was trapped in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by the wreckage of a wedding that would never take place. The vacuum of competence they had nurtured for 26 years had finally imploded, trapping them all inside the debris. My phone vibrated against the glass coffee table,
interrupting my quiet reflection. The screen illuminated, displaying a rapid succession of incoming text messages. The sender was Brittany. I did not open the application immediately. I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the warm liquid soothe my throat before I finally tapped the notification. The messages were a chaotic stream of venomous accusations and desperate projections. She blamed me for the loss of her fiancé. She typed out long, sprawling paragraphs claiming I had poisoned the Collins family against her out of pure jealousy. She stated that I was a cold-hearted monster who prioritized money over family loyalty. She accused me of destroying her future, her happiness, and her reputation. "You ruined my life," her final message read. "You took everything from me because you want me to be as miserable and alone as you are." I read the words scrolling through the digital tantrum with profound clinical detachment. The insults did not sting. The accusations did not trigger the familiar ache of inadequacy that used to plague my younger self. I looked at the glowing text and saw nothing but the frantic thrashing of a creature denied its unearned meal. Brittany lacked the fundamental capacity for self-reflection. She could not comprehend that her own greed and her willingness to exploit my hard work had orchestrated her downfall. She believed she was entitled to a luxurious existence simply because she desired it. When the universe demanded payment, she searched for a scapegoat. I did not type a response. Engaging with her delusion would only validate her victimhood. I did not need to defend my character or justify my survival. The raw data spoke for itself. I had protected my assets. She had squandered her opportunities. The equation was perfectly balanced. I tapped the small icon in the top corner of the screen and selected the block contact option. A prompt appeared asking if I was sure I wanted to prevent this person from reaching me. I pressed confirm. The barrage of toxic messages vanished. The boundary was sealed closed forever. I set the phone down and looked out my living room window. The suburban street was quiet, bathed in the soft amber glow of the municipal street lamps. The social destruction of the Stone family was thorough and satisfying. They had lost their wealthy connections, their pristine reputation, and their golden child's future. Yet the quiet evening felt like the calm eye of a hurricane. The relational reckoning was over, but the bureaucratic machinery I had set in motion was still churning, unseen in the background. The bank had processed my sworn affidavits. The digital footprints Gary left on my old laptop were no longer just an internal security matter. Those records were currently sitting on a desk inside a federal building, awaiting review by law enforcement professionals who did not care about neighborhood gossip or canceled weddings. My parents thought the worst of their nightmare was the loss of Trent Collins and the embarrassment of a bounced check. They were retreating into their suburban fortress, believing they could weather the storm and rebuild their fraudulent lives in quiet anonymity. They had no idea that the real storm had not even made landfall. The suburbs were about to get a very loud, highly public wake-up call, and there was nowhere left for them to hide. The following Wednesday morning arrived with a deceptive tranquility. The suburban enclave where Gary and Susan resided was a pristine neighborhood characterized by manicured lawns, towering oak trees, and an intricate network of unspoken judgments. In communities like this throughout the Iowa heartland, perception operated as the primary currency. A well-maintained facade equated to moral superiority. The residents spent decades cultivating their reputations through Sunday church attendance, charity bake sales, and polite driveway conversations. At 9:15, an unmarked dark sedan turned onto their quiet street. The vehicle did not possess flashing lights or blaring sirens, but it carried an undeniable weight of authority. It rolled to a slow, deliberate halt directly in front of the Stone residence. Two individuals stepped out onto the sunlit pavement.
They wore unassuming gray suits, lacking police uniforms, yet projecting the rigid, intimidating posture of federal law enforcement. Miles away, in downtown Des Moines, I sat in my spacious corner office reviewing a fresh set of agricultural yield predictions. The transition into my new executive role had been seamless. My focus was sharp, my professional environment secure. Then my smartphone illuminated on the mahogany desk. A motion detection alert pinged from the security application linked to the camera mounted on my parents' front porch. I had installed the smart doorbell system for them 3 years ago, during a brief period when I still harbored the foolish hope of buying their affection through acts of service. I had paid for the hardware, set up the network, and retained the master administrative access on my personal device. They had never bothered to learn how the software functioned. I tapped the notification opening the live video feed. The high-definition wide-angle lens captured the two suited figures ascending the concrete steps. I watched the screen with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. The doorbell chimed, transmitting a crisp audio feed directly into my quiet office. A few agonizing seconds ticked by before the heavy wooden front door swung inward. Gary appeared in the frame. He wore a casual golf shirt and khaki trousers, holding a ceramic coffee mug. For 30 years, my father had navigated the world by leveraging his firm handshake and hearty Midwestern charm to mask his profound financial incompetence. He believed a confident smile could negotiate any obstacle. He stepped onto the porch, adopting his standard, respectable patriarch persona. "Good morning, gentlemen," Gary greeted, his voice booming with practiced hospitality. "What can I do for you on this fine day?" The taller of the two men did not return the smile. He reached inside his breast pocket, retrieving a leather wallet. He flicked it open to display a silver badge and federal identification credentials. "Special Agent Davies," he introduced himself, his tone devoid of any conversational warmth. "This is Special Agent Vance. We are conducting an official inquiry regarding interstate financial fraud. Are you Gary Stone?" The color drained from my father's face with startling speed. The confident posture dissolved, leaving his shoulders slumped and his hands trembling. Coffee sloshed over the rim of his mug, dripping onto the concrete porch. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously toward the quiet street. "Yes, that is me," Gary stammered, the hearty charm entirely eradicated. "But there must be some sort of mistake. We are upstanding citizens. I think a bank glitch caused a minor misunderstanding with a recent family transaction." Agent Davies remained stoic, a man immune to the desperate fabrications of cornered criminals. He retrieved a sleek black folder from his briefcase, opening it to reveal a stack of printed forensic reports. "This is not a banking error," Mr. Stone Davies corrected, reading from the top sheet. "The financial institution flagged an unauthorized login event originating from this exact location. We possess the digital forensics, confirming a systemic breach of dual-factor authentication." Gary tried to interrupt, raising his free hand in a defensive gesture. "Wait, you have to understand. My daughter is the account holder. We share finances. It was just a clumsy attempt to move wedding funds." Agent Vance stepped forward, narrowing his eyes. He possessed the clinical intensity of an investigator who had heard every pathetic excuse in the book. "You accessed a password management vault using an archaic laptop device registered to a secondary user," Vance stated, reciting the raw data. "Our cyber division traced the specific media access control address directly to the broadband router sitting inside your living room. You logged in under a stolen identity and attempted to route $85,000 to a separate party. Because the targeted clearinghouse operates in Chicago, Illinois, your digital footprint crossed state borders." The trap snapped shut with deafening clarity. The agent stripped away the emotional excuses and presented the cold, unyielding mathematics of the crime. Gary was no longer a misunderstood father trying to help his golden child.
He was a documented cybercriminal caught in a web of time-stamped evidence. The front door creaked wider, revealing Susan stepping onto the porch. She wore a floral blouse, her hair perfectly styled for her weekly garden club meeting. My mother tied her entire self-worth to her social standing. She thrived on the envy of her peers and the respect of her neighbors. She froze upon seeing the federal badges. Her gaze swept past the investigators, landing on the house next door. Mrs. Gable, a notorious neighborhood gossip, had parted her living room blinds and was staring directly at our porch. 2 doors down, a man walking his golden retriever paused on the sidewalk, watching the confrontation unfold with intense curiosity. The social execution was happening in broad daylight on her own meticulously landscaped property. Susan resorted to the only weapon she had ever successfully wielded. She burst into tears. It was a theatrical display of weeping, her face burying into her hands as she unleashed a torrent of hysterical sobs. She leaned against the doorframe, projecting the image of a fragile, terrified victim. "Please, you are destroying our lives," Susan wailed, her voice carrying across the silent suburban lawns. "We did not know it was illegal. We just wanted to pay for a wedding venue. My daughter is trying to ruin us out of spite. She is a vindictive, cruel girl, doing this to punish her own family." The federal agents did not flinch. They did not offer a comforting shoulder or a sympathetic ear. The tears that had manipulated me for nearly 3 decades held zero currency in the realm of federal jurisdiction. Agent Davies pulled 2 thick sealed envelopes from his folder. He extended his arm, handing one to Gary and pressing the other toward the weeping woman. "These are formal subpoenas," Davies announced, his voice echoing clearly through my smartphone speaker. "You are both mandated to appear before a federal magistrate next Tuesday at 9 in the morning. I highly suggest you retain competent legal counsel before you step into that courtroom. Have a safe day." The investigators turned in unison, walking back down the concrete steps. They climbed into their dark sedan and drove away, leaving Gary and Susan standing on the porch, clutching the legal documents. The neighbors continued to watch the silent judgment settling over the property like a heavy shroud. I locked my phone screen, terminating the video feed. I swiveled my ergonomic chair back toward my monitors, feeling an immense surge of satisfaction. The bureaucratic machinery had functioned flawlessly. The emotional warfare my parents relied upon had been entirely neutralized by the rigid protocols of the justice system. 15 minutes later, my corporate email inbox produced a sharp ping. I navigated to the new message. The sender address belonged to Gary. The email was a frantic, desperate block of text riddled with typographical errors and poor grammar. He abandoned his patriarchal authority, pleading for salvation. He begged me to contact the bank and retract my affidavits. He promised to undergo counseling, apologize to Trent's family, and pay me back every single dollar if I would just stop the impending prosecution. He claimed a felony conviction would render him unemployable and force them into homelessness. He ended the message by invoking the concept of unconditional love, demanding I save them from ruin. I read the pathetic plea, noting the profound lack of genuine remorse. He was not sorry for attempting to steal my life savings. He was only sorry that the digital perimeter had caught him in the act. I clicked the reply button. I did not waste my time drafting a lengthy emotional response. I did not need to justify my actions or debate the morality of their impending doom. I typed my response, reading the words aloud to the quiet, empty space of my office. The bank pressed the charges. I simply told the truth. I hit send, watching the message vanish into the digital ether. The legal escalation was complete. My parents had sought to build a lavish future using stolen capital, and now they were going to harvest the bitter consequences of their own unyielding greed. The final reckoning was approaching, and the courtroom doors were already swinging open.
6 months evaporated, leaving behind the suffocating summer heat and ushering in the brutal, unforgiving chill of a Midwestern January. The justice system operates with a slow, grinding efficiency, pulverizing anyone caught within its gears. The dust finally settled over the wreckage of my biological family, revealing a landscape forever altered by the consequences of their unyielding greed. Gary and Susan stood before a federal magistrate in a sterile downtown courtroom, trading their country club arrogance for the hollow, defeated posture of convicted criminals. Facing the terrifying reality of a decade behind bars, they accepted a draconian plea agreement engineered by their exhausted defense attorneys. The leniency ended at avoiding a prison sentence. The judge handed down severe financial penalties, mandated hundreds of hours of community service, and slapped both of my parents with permanent felony convictions. The fallout was swift and irrevocable. Gary lost his insurance and brokerage licenses immediately. The local business community, an ecosystem that valued trust and reputation above all else, exiled him without hesitation. Former associates refused to return his calls. Clients severed their contracts overnight. Susan could no longer show her face at the Neighborhood Homeowners Association or the weekly Garden Society meetings. They became social pariahs, ghosts haunting a town that now actively despised them. Retaining top-tier legal counsel drained whatever legitimate savings they possessed. Without a steady income, the mortgage on their pristine suburban fortress went into default within 90 days. The bank, the very institution they had attempted to defraud, showed zero mercy. A foreclosure notice arrived, taped to the front door, acting as a glaring neon sign broadcasting their bankruptcy to the entire street. They were forced to vacate the property, packing their remaining possessions into cheap, rented moving vans, under the watchful, judgmental gaze of their former friends. They relocated to a cramped, drafty apartment on the industrial edge of the city, a stark contrast to the sprawling, manicured lawns they used to rule. The house went to a county foreclosure auction on a freezing Tuesday morning. I did not attend the bidding in person, but I authorized the capital expenditure from my executive desk. My agriculture tech firm was expanding its sustainable energy division. We required large, clear tracts of land near the city limits to erect and evaluate prototype wind turbines. The company purchased the sprawling property for a fraction of its original market value. A month later, commercial demolition crews arrived. Yellow excavators tore down the formal dining room, where they had consistently mocked my career. Bulldozers ripped up the patio where they had boasted about stealing my money to fund an opulent lifestyle. The structure was leveled, the topsoil churned, and the foundation eradicated, paving the way for renewable energy testing. The industry my sister sneered at, the dirt and wind energy she deemed beneath her social standing, ended up reclaiming their fake empire. While my parents navigated their ruin, the golden child faced her own bitter harvest. The Grand Prairie estate, the elite luxury venue she tried to book with phantom funds, did not simply cancel her reservation and walk away. Their corporate legal team pursued her for breach of contract, demanding the non-refundable deposit, penalties, and administrative damages caused by the bounced electronic check. Brittany possessed zero assets. Her credit score resembled a barren wasteland. Facing a civil judgment that would garnish her future wages for a decade, she begged the venue proprietors for a payment plan. The owners, seasoned business operators, who despised entitlement, offered a harsh alternative. They required cheap, reliable labor for their busy winter gala season. Brittany was given a choice: face a devastating lawsuit or sign an employment contract agreeing to work off her debt at minimum wage. The woman who once scoffed at my grueling work ethic now spent her weekend nights wearing a rigid, uncomfortable catering uniform. She carried heavy trays of champagne flutes and miniature crab cakes through the very ballroom she had envisioned for her dream wedding. She served appetizers to the wealthy elite she once desperately tried to infiltrate. The humiliation was thorough and unrelenting. During a prestigious charity gala in late December, Trent's family attended as guests of honor. Brittany had to stand near the carving station, her hair pulled back under a hairnet, pouring wine for the very people who had witnessed her social execution months prior. Every dropped napkin, every spilled drink earned her a sharp reprimand from the catering manager. She had to watch radiant brides dance under the crystal chandeliers, knowing she was relegated to the shadows, cleaning up discarded plates and wiping down tables. The golden child was finally experiencing the crushing weight of genuine labor. I learned these details through the intricate network of local gossip, the information flowing across the city without my active participation. I did not visit the restaurant to gloat over my sister's misery. I did not drive past the demolished house to revel in my parents' misfortune. True victory requires no audience. The antagonists engineered their own dismantling. Their criminal entitlement acted as the sole architect of their collapse. They had tried to harvest my stability, to fuel their illusions, failing to realize that a parasite dies when the host walks away. Sitting in my high-rise office overlooking the snow-covered plains of Iowa, I felt a profound sense of equilibrium. The universe had balanced the equation with ruthless precision. My boundaries remained untested, my professional reputation thrived, and my financial fortress stood tall. The storm they tried to unleash upon my life had merely watered my roots, allowing me to grow stronger while they drowned in the flood. The stage was perfectly set for my own unbroken horizon, leaving the ghosts of the past buried in the fertile Midwestern soil. The horizon broke over the vast Iowa plains, bleeding a pale golden light across the endless expanse of agricultural land. The harsh winter frost had finally retreated, leaving the rich, dark topsoil exposed and ready for the upcoming planting season. I stood in the center of a sprawling 2,000-acre testing site, breathing in the crisp morning air. It carried the faint, earthy scent of turning seasons and the undeniable promise of renewal. My boots sank slightly into the soft earth, grounding me in the reality of the landscape I had built my entire career upon. Above me, a specialized hexacopter drone hovered against the clear morning sky. Its rotors emitted a steady mechanical hum, slicing through the profound rural silence. I looked down at the rugged tactical tablet resting in my hands. The screen displayed a real-time topographical heat map, feeding directly from the drone's advanced multispectral sensors. I was running the final diagnostic protocol on a proprietary crop mapping algorithm I had spent the last 2 years developing from scratch. The software was designed to scan deep beneath the surface, identifying root rot, moisture deficiencies, and soil degradation long before the decay could infect the healthy crops above. The parallel to my own life was impossible to ignore. My professional expertise lay in diagnosing hidden rot and excising it before it destroyed the harvest. It had taken me nearly 3 decades to apply that same rigorous analytical methodology to my own bloodline. The toxic decay that had threatened to consume my entire existence was now gone, eradicated by the strict enforcement of legal and financial boundaries. The tablet chimed, indicating a successful diagnostic run. The data compilation was flawless. I tapped the screen, saving the parameters to the secure company cloud network. This specific algorithm was the cornerstone of my recent corporate elevation. Following the chaotic events of the previous summer, the executive board had unanimously appointed me as the vice president of data analytics. My new title came with a corner office, a substantial equity stake in the firm, and a level of professional autonomy I had only ever dreamed of achieving. My mother had weaponized my career, threatening to invoke a corporate morality clause to destroy my reputation and force my compliance. Her desperate blackmail attempt had produced the exact opposite result. The chief executive officer recognized my integrity, rewarding my refusal to compromise under extreme duress. My employer valued hard data and unyielding resolve, the exact traits my parents had tried to suppress. I secured the drone, bringing it down for a smooth, automated landing on a designated staging mat. I placed the tablet into its protective carrying case and retrieved my smartphone from my heavy jacket pocket. The screen illuminated, identifying my facial biometrics before unlocking the interface. I opened my primary wealth management application. The digital dashboard loaded instantly, displaying a series of robust, highly secure accounts. Every dollar I had earned, every investment I had carefully cultivated, was locked safely behind the impenetrable, ironclad walls of an irrevocable living trust. The numbers on the screen were not just digits representing purchasing power. They represented absolute freedom. They were the tangible proof of my survival, an empire built on graveyard shifts, community college textbooks, and relentless, solitary dedication. The funds my father had attempted to siphon away were legally untouchable, guarded by strict federal statutes and elite corporate attorneys. My parents could never place a lien on my townhouse. They could never sue me for financial support under any obscure familial obligation laws. The bureaucratic fortress I had constructed was flawless, operating independent of any emotional manipulation. I navigated away from the banking application and opened my communication log. The recent call history was a testament to the peace I had finally achieved. There were no frantic voicemails demanding financial bailouts. There were no lengthy text messages drenched in manufactured hysteria. There were no manipulative guilt trips weaponizing the concept of family duty. The screen displayed only routine messages from colleagues, mundane calendar reminders, and a dinner invitation from a friend. The suffocating noise that had defined my youth was replaced by a profound, luxurious silence. The architecture of guilt had been completely bulldozed into the earth, leaving a clean, level foundation in its wake. Standing alone in the vast agricultural field, I reflected on the fundamental nature of the dynamic I had dismantled. For 29 years, I believed my primary function was to act as a load-bearing pillar for my parents' fragile egos and my sister's unearned lifestyle. The Midwestern culture of unwavering family loyalty had been twisted into a tool of psychological extortion. They conditioned me to believe that setting a boundary was an act of extreme cruelty. They taught me that self-preservation was synonymous with selfishness. The truth was entirely different. The most loving thing a person can do for a parasite is to stop feeding it. By refusing to shield my parents from the federal investigators, I did not destroy them. I simply allowed the universe to hold them accountable. I stepped out of the way and let the justice system process their digital footprint. By denying my sister the financial crutch she demanded, I forced her to interact with the real world. She was currently learning the value of $1 by carrying trays of champagne flutes for minimum wage. I did not exact vengeance. I simply let gravity pull them down to the foundation they had built for themselves. A flock of starlings took flight from a distant line of ancient oak trees, their synchronized movements painting a dark, fluid shape against the brightening sky. I watched them soar over the wind turbines that dotted the horizon, their massive white blades turning slowly in the steady morning breeze. The world was moving forward, operating on the reliable laws of physics, cause and effect, and hard verifiable data. I turned my back on the open field and walked toward the gravel access road. My practical, paid-off utility vehicle waited for me, its engine block cold but reliable. I had purchased the SUV with my own money, negotiating the terms without a cosigner or a parental safety net. It lacked the ostentatious luxury of the vehicles my parents used to lease, but it belonged entirely to me. Every scratch on the bumper and every mile on the odometer was earned through honest labor. I opened the driver's side door and climbed into the cabin. The leather seats felt familiar, offering a quiet sanctuary from the crisp outdoor chill. I inserted the key into the ignition. The engine turned over with a steady, reassuring rumble vibrating through the steering column. I shifted the transmission into drive, releasing the parking brake. As I steered the vehicle down the long gravel path toward the main highway, I glanced into the rearview mirror one final time. The testing site stretched out behind me, a testament to innovation and growth. The demolished remnants of my past, the forged signatures, the stolen credentials, and the toxic entitlement were far behind me. They were buried deep in the fertile Iowa topsoil, serving as nothing more than fertilizer for the life I was currently cultivating. I turned onto the paved asphalt, accelerating as the speed limit increased. The heater warmed the interior of the car, chasing away the last lingering remnants of the winter cold. I did not feel the need to look back again. There was nothing left to salvage, and nothing left to mourn. I drove forward, leaving the wreckage in the dust, with nothing ahead of me but an unbroken horizon and the quiet, magnificent triumph of a life I built entirely for myself. There is a deeply rooted mythology woven into the fabric of American culture, especially within the vast rolling plains of the heartland. From a young age, we are raised to revere the traditional household, believing that biological ties operate as an unbreakable safety net. We are taught that a shared last name guarantees mutual respect, unwavering support, and a permanent sanctuary from the harsh, unpredictable realities of the outside world. The Midwest, with its emphasis on community values and Sunday dinners, perfectly encapsulates this wholesome ideal. But what happens when that sanctuary becomes a psychological trap? The journey of stripping away the facade of a fraudulent family empire forces us to confront a profoundly uncomfortable reality about parenting responsibility and the long-term guidance we provide to the next generation. It challenges the conventional wisdom demanding blind loyalty at the absolute expense of individual survival. At the core of this narrative lies a severe, tragic failure of emotional awareness. Authentic parenting requires a delicate balance of nurturing affection and firm boundary setting, along with a relentless commitment to raising capable, independent adults. However, some caretakers twist that sacred duty into a weapon of chronic guilt. They view their most capable offspring not as autonomous individuals deserving of support, but as diversified portfolios. The responsible child becomes a resource to be harvested whenever their preferred sibling falters. This dynamic exposes a critical, fatal flaw in how certain traditional structures operate behind closed doors. When caretakers prioritize social status and neighborhood perception over honesty and fairness, they create a highly toxic ecosystem. They groom one person to bear the crushing weight of the world's expectations, while actively crippling the other through endless, suffocating enabling. We often mistake providing for our youth with shielding them from any form of consequence. In modern society, there is immense, suffocating pressure to ensure our dependents never experience failure, maintaining a pristine public image of success, even if it requires living dangerously beyond our means. The favored syndrome illustrates the catastrophic danger of this misguided approach. By constantly rescuing a dependent, funding a lavish lifestyle they did not earn, and demanding their siblings subsidize their existence, caretakers create a massive vacuum of competence. They believe they are demonstrating affection, but they are actually orchestrating ultimate ruin. True responsibility does not mean smoothing over every obstacle or paying off every debt. It means equipping young minds with the moral and practical tools necessary to climb over those hurdles themselves. When caretakers hand unearned wealth to one individual, while simultaneously stealing from the resilient soul who worked grueling midnight shifts to build her own foundation, they shatter the fundamental concept of justice. They teach the favored sibling that they are completely above the law, and teach the resilient worker that their hard-earned success is merely collateral damage. This systemic unfairness breeds a quiet, simmering resentment that eventually destroys the entire family unit. Honesty is the bedrock of any enduring relationship, yet it is frequently the first casualty in households obsessed with superficial appearances.
The antagonists in this reflection resorted to identity theft, federal fraud, and elaborate social lies simply to maintain a glittering illusion of generational wealth. They believed their status as biological creators granted them immunity from standard morality. They weaponized the concept of duty, demanding perjury to shield themselves from the justice system. This highlights a terrifying distortion of our most cherished values. We are repeatedly instructed to honor our elders, but how do we honor individuals who actively plot our financial destruction just to save their own skin? The narrative suggests that the most profound act of respect we can offer our abusers is holding them entirely accountable for their actions. The response to this betrayal offers a masterclass in long-term guidance, albeit through a painful reversal of roles. The resilient daughter did not engage in hysterical screaming matches on manicured lawns. She did not beg for the validation she had been systematically denied for decades. Instead, she utilized cold, clinical detachment. She allowed the bureaucratic machinery of the legal system to enforce the perimeters her relatives refused to respect. In doing so, she provided the harsh medicine her relatives desperately needed. She forced them to interact with reality. Forcing a toxic relative to face the direct consequences of their criminal entitlement is not an act of vengeance. It is a necessary, life-saving intervention. It is the agonizing process of bulldozing a rotten foundation so something genuine might eventually grow in its place. Navigating these complex emotional landscapes requires immense courage and a willingness to look beneath the superficial topsoil of our own lives. We all carry the heavy weight of expectations, the subtle manipulations, and the unspoken demands of the people who raised us. If you have ever felt like the designated shock absorber for your household, if you have ever had to build a fortress of legal boundaries to protect your own peace, you are certainly not alone. I invite you to subscribe and follow Zara Told Stories. Here we share narratives validating your quiet struggles, narratives exposing the painful truths of familial obligation, and celebrating the magnificent triumph of claiming your independence. Join our growing community as we explore the journeys empowering us to break cycles of guilt and step boldly into our authentic power. As we reflect on the ruins of this dismantled empire, we are left standing in the quiet aftermath of a fundamental truth. Society constantly dictates that we must forgive our blood relatives, no matter the severity of the transgression, insisting that reconciliation is always the noble path. We are conditioned from birth to believe that severing ties constitutes the ultimate failure of human compassion. I challenge that notion entirely. Sometimes the highest form of affection you can offer a destructive relative is a locked door. True compassion does not require you to set yourself on fire simply to keep your abusers warm. It requires the immense strength to walk away, letting them experience the bitter harvest of their own choices. Perhaps the ultimate familial duty is not preserving the unit at all costs, but rather ensuring that the cycle of exploitation finally ends with you. Ask yourself, what heavy burdens are you still carrying today that you never should have been asked to hold in the first